Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast, your home for Pittsburgh Penguins news and analysis. You can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Ice-Burgh, or you can find us anywhere you get your podcast from. I'm your host, Nick Belsky, joined as always by Nick Horwat. We got a great show for you guys today. We'll catch you up on all of the news surrounding the Penguins this week, because it's been a pretty newsy week for the Penguins, despite a 4-game losing streak. And then we'll ask, is the Penguins' most consistent unit becoming their biggest weakness? It's certainly been the case over the last 4 games. Hopefully, they can turn things around, and we'll close things out with a discussion about the Pittsburgh Penguins goaltending situation, because something has to give in net for the Penguins. Let's get started on the Tip of the Ice-Burgh. And we're going to start things off with some news and notes here. First and foremost, obviously, anytime we talk Pittsburgh Penguins, anything that happens with Sidney Crosby automatically goes to the top of the docket. But he is now the NHL's all-time leader in face-off wins, with now 15,183, passing Patrice Bergeron to claim the crown of the face-off king, dubbed by Colby Armstrong on Sportsnet Pittsburgh. Crosby's just collecting milestones and records like infinity stones at this point. He has a goals milestone that he's hit this year. He has an assists milestone that he's hit this year, points milestones, face-off wins, games played. I think it's just a testament to him being a complete superstar, correct?
No kidding. He's got all those under his belt. It is the most face-offs since they started recording the stat in 1997, so a fine little asterisk there. But nonetheless, when you look up that stat, he is at the top, and it's one of those interesting stats, one of the more fun ones that you don't discuss as often or as much, but truthfully a testament to the kind of faith the team has put in him over the last 2 decades, the kind of skill he has in that one particular area of the game. And then, as you mentioned, all the other accolades and milestones he's surpassing throughout these last couple of years. He's also a couple of points away from surpassing Joe Sakic. I forget who it is exactly on the all-time scoring list. So again, just the accolades continue to add up in every way, shape, and form imaginable. And that'll continue throughout the year. And I was right, Joe Sakic, he's 1 point behind, actually. So that could be something that the next time we come to you on this podcast, we're discussing that he has moved into 9th all-time in scoring.
Yeah, like I said, infinity stones. He's just collecting them faster than Thanos did on Avengers Infinity War. But the one big one that I think we're all looking at, obviously, every one of these milestones is important, is impactful. And like we mentioned, it's a testament to him being what he's been his entire career, which is a complete superstar, an all-around player that does pretty much everything on the ice that you ask of him. But the one that everybody's kind of been eyeing, and the one that everybody's keyed in on, especially coming into this season, is Wayne Gretzky's point per game record. That's the one that we've been following. Whenever Crosby was struggling, we're saying, man, he's not even at a point per game, which has been his floor throughout his 19-year career. Do you think by the end of this year, he does it, he adds this another notch into his belt, and he breaks Wayne Gretzky's point per game seasons record with 20?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, he's over it now. It's barely over, but he's got 44 points in 42 games. You can't ask for a 37-year-old to do too much more than be at a point per game pace, really. I mean, we understand that we were expecting a regression at some point. He still isn't showing that many signs of it. It was just a bit of a slow start. There's still plenty of time for him to take games over and really separate his point total from the games played number. There's time for him to steal games, add points, create help, like get a ton of helpers on the surging Rickard Rakell. Get his power play points are doing pretty well too. If I'm trying to find it, 15 over the course of the season so far, much better than last year. So that should help get those numbers up. I do think at the end of the year, he will still be at that point per game pace. It might be way closer to 82 than anyone would like, but I think nonetheless, it'll be another year of a point per game pace for Sidney Crosby, so long as he remains healthy and he can really just keep playing well with Rickard Rakell and Brian Rust on his other side.
Yeah, before the season, we were talking him breaking the record for the most points scored by a 37-year-old in NHL history. And that, I think, was also Joe Sakic, who had exactly 100 points in his age 37 season. I think that might be a bit of a stretch. Now, I'm not going to rule it out because Sidney Crosby can go on an ungodly tear just because he's done that throughout his career, especially whenever his team needs it most. And let's just face it, the Penguins might need it most when it comes to March and early April trying to push into a playoff spot, because as of right now, they are in, I mean, we've called it the murky middle all season long. I think we need a new name for it because it is getting ridiculous how tightly contested the first wild card seed to the last position in the Eastern Conference is at this moment. But like you mentioned, he's been getting better and better every single game. 20 points in his first 21 games, and that was considered a slow start. He has 24 in his last 21, and I'd imagine that just continues to ramp up through the season, especially with the way, as you mentioned, the power play is starting to figure it out and now clicking as a top 5 unit in the NHL.
Yeah, you don't even need to call it the murky middle or the mushy middle or just that the floundering middle, whatever you want to call it, because at this point it's just the Eastern Conference. It is just the NHL's Eastern Conference from top to bottom. There are legitimate playoff contenders. Again, they're not all Stanley Cup contenders, and obviously a bunch of these teams are going to miss the playoffs. But it wouldn't take long for teams, even like the Buffalo Sabres, who are in last in the East, to find themselves in a good position. I mean, again, there are the unlikely teams to make it, or the unlikely teams to put themselves in that fight. But it's just how tight it all is, how close it all is. There is no middle. It is either you're in a playoff spot or you're in the hunt. That's the way it is. It's the middle of the season. Those early season standings are out the window. Everyone's played 40, 41 games, and now it's that time. And for Crosby, you give him the satisfaction or just like you said, you tell him that, hey, the team needs you to produce. You guys are in a playoff position. You're fighting for playoff position. You're at 500. You're right on the doorstep. That's when he's going to turn it on. That's when he's going to hit that other level. So maybe he does, again, sniff around 100 points. It seems unlikely, but if the Penguins remain at this level of they're right on the doorstep, they're pretty darn close. They're fighting for playoff spots. They're holding playoff spots. It's going to be interesting to see if he can turn it into something, especially point production wise.
Yeah, now that is obviously, I'm going to say, going to make for a very, very interesting couple of months here leading up to the trade deadline, because GMs are going to have to siphon out whether or not, hey, do we push for a playoff spot and try to make that this season? Or do we kind of take a step back and say, we don't think that if we get there, we're going to do much. So we still keep with our plans of selling, because there are teams that are in the race now that I don't think expected to be in the race even a month ago. And I think the Penguins could fall into that camp as well. So it's going to make for an interesting run up to the trade deadline, and then obviously an interesting push for the playoffs after the trade deadline in the final month of the season. But for the Penguins to do that, they're going to need some healthy bodies back. Now, they've been relatively healthy this season compared to what we've seen in the past, but a couple of injuries to update you on. Phil Tomasino, with a lower body injury, remains week to week as the designation for him, but he did skate yesterday and today at the Penguins optional morning skate. So positive progress on that front. The one thing that I'm going to look at for Tomasino is this could be a la Rickard Rakell last year, kind of a reset for him. He came over to the Penguins, 3 goals, 1 assist in his first 5 games. Since then, he has 1 goal, 2 assists in 11 games. He was dropped from the second line down to the third line, and there were some games in which, I mean, he was kind of invisible, which even taking out the fact that he was scoring goals in that first 5, he was always very much kind of top of mind whenever he was on the ice. He made himself known. He's kind of faded to the back a little bit before getting this injury. So this could be similar to what Rakell had last year, kind of a reset for him. You're just hoping he doesn't have to deal with kind of the lingering effects the same way Rakell did with his shoulder last year.
Yeah, and even if Rakell was dealing with lingering effects, he still seemed to be putting up decent enough numbers for his position in the lineup and for really what the beginning of the year was for him. As for Tomasino, just a matter of jumping back in and picking up where he left off, adding a few points here and there would be nice. See how it all goes. I mean, this team's got a ton of depth all of a sudden. I mean, that's kind of the that's how you know this team's been relatively healthy, is that we haven't been discussing the idea of Kevin Hayes or Jesse Puljujarvi not being in the lineup because why are these other guys getting pushes? No, they're in because everyone's healthy and there's a ton of bottom six forwards in this group. The doors just kind of finally opened for both of them to return to the lineup. For Hayes, it was more of there's guys struggling. For Puljujarvi, it was the sudden injury he was already getting in before Malkin was injured, but it opened the doors for those two to return to the lineup, and that's sort of a testament to just the kind of depth this team has. Whether it's good depth or not, it's all bottom six mostly, so it's a matter of separating yourself from the pack and holding down spots.
Yeah, and we talked about it on Tuesday, that second line right wing position is up for grabs. I mean, it was Beauvillier the other day, as we'll talk about, that line of Glass, Bunting, Beauvillier, but whenever Malkin comes back healthy, and we'll get to that in a minute here, there really is nobody that you can put there in pen. It is penciled in very faintly, so you can erase it the next day if you need to, because Beauvillier has played there. We've seen Cody Glass bump to the wing and play there. We've seen Phil Tomasino for a time play there. So that opportunity is ahead of all of these players. Tomasino firmly in the mix for that spot. If he elevates his game, I mean, you could find a home next to Evgeni Malkin here for this season and potentially next as well, because right now the Penguins, they're in need of somebody to step up, because if you look at the rest of the top six, it's pretty figured out. The top line is the top line, and you're not changing it because they are absolutely phenomenal. Michael Bunting had himself a crazy game against Columbus and just seems to be firing on all cylinders. And when Malkin comes back, obviously Malkin is going to be in the top six. So there's one top six spot open for Phil Tomasino. Take the bull by the horns, grab that spot when you come back from injury, use this as a fresh start, kind of what Rickard Rakell said last year when he came back from injury. And hopefully we get to see the Phil Tomasino his first 5 games with the Pittsburgh Penguins. Speaking of Evgeni Malkin, we have an update on him. Upper body injury, missed Tuesday's game, which was the first missed game that he had since April 21st of 2022. You can say what you want about the way he's performed since signing that new contract, and I think both of us on this show would tend to say that he's performed well, and he certainly performed up to the level that was expected whenever he re-signed that 4-year deal. The question was, is he going to stay healthy? Because health had been a big issue for him throughout his entire career, but specifically in those late years right before this last contract update. Well, he plays over 200 consecutive games next to Sidney Crosby, which is by far the longest stretch that they've ever had. Shout out to Bob Grove on Twitter for that nugget. Misses Tuesday's game, but appears that he could be back tonight. If not tonight, then on Saturday. He is a game time decision officially, according to Mike Sullivan.
Gotta love the old game time decision ahead of a early January game. But yeah, the first time in 246 games that Evgeni Malkin missed. That's by far got to be the longest stretch he's gone his entire career without missing a game. I mean, you consider it's exactly 3 seasons in terms of 41 this year, 41 the 21-22 season, and then 2 straight 82 games the last 2 years. I mean, that's an impressive run for Evgeni Malkin specifically. I think it's, like you said, it's a little over 200. I think it's 209 straight games played alongside Sidney Crosby. Again, just some of the stuff that the Penguins have never seen before, whether it's Sidney Crosby being healthy for that many consecutive games, whether it's Evgeni Malkin being healthy for that many straight games, or those two playing together for that many games. It's something the Penguins have never seen before. It's a shame the last 2 years I haven't seen playoff bursts come from it, but
yeah,
Evgeni Malkin really put the whole, the ailments and the injury question marks behind him. You really forgot that for both of them, they used to be pretty injury-riddled players. I mean, you always monitored it, and you always kept an eye on it. You always knew in the back of your head that's what they had in the past. But they both have been proving relatively nicely that, yeah, they're pretty solid players now. I mean, remember going into the I think it was the 21-22 season, if not the next one, Evgeni Malkin has a wrist injury that he's not going to deal with until he retires. Did we all forget about that? I mean, that's maybe that's something to do with that. Like maybe that flared up, or no one knows really exactly what happened. He was a full participant in that morning skate the other day and showed no signs of anything wrong. So we don't know exactly what's going on with it, but that's still something that he's got carrying around with him, that he's waiting to retire to really handle that. And he went on to play 246 straight games.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, the guy's 37 years old. I'm 28 years old, and sometimes I wake up and my upper body's hurting just from sleeping. So, I mean, who knows what the issue was on Tuesday, but it seems like he might be coming back. Now, we mentioned earlier, Glass, Bunting, Beauvillier was the second line on Tuesday against Columbus. They played very well. Now, a lot of that was Michael Bunting being a dog on a bone and being an absolutely freak of nature, but 10 minutes, 23 seconds of ice time at 5-on-5, 13-3 in shot attempts against the Columbus Blue Jackets, 3-1 in shots on goal, 65% of the expected goals for. And while Michael Bunting did score, that was on the power play, but that line looked very good. And that's coming with a guy in Anthony Beauvillier that was about to be a healthy scratch that night until Evgeni Malkin bowed out at the last minute. So my question is, for Mike Sullivan coming into tonight, I understand Malkin's coming back and he will be the second line center, but do you try somehow to keep that unit together to see if there's a little bit of magic there that you can finally have something consistent as maybe a third line? We all know that Michael Bunting is a second line player on this team, but it's kind of the same as the Phil Kessel thing. If it's working out and creating a good third line, maybe you put Malkin with guys like an O'Connor. Maybe you give Puljujarvi that chance next to Malkin. He's gotten a few there throughout his time in Pittsburgh. Or maybe you put Kevin Hayes up there. I mean, Malkin hasn't been as fleet of foot as he has been in years past. Hayes is clearly not fleet of foot, but you know what Hayes is? Very good with the puck on his stick. He's very smooth with the puck on his stick. So do you try to make some Frankenstein second line where Malkin has to elevate guys like O'Connor, guys like Hayes, guys like Puljujarvi to be second line players in order to keep a line together that showed signs of life against the Columbus Blue Jackets?
That's a tough call just because you're right. That line showed signs of life and Michael Bunting scored, albeit on the power play. But something about Evgeni Malkin playing with Michael Bunting has worked before. Yeah. It's worked this year. And I think maybe you try, we know Mike Sullivan loves his duos when it comes to forwards. Maybe, you're still staple gunning Bunting and Malkin together just because it's worked before. It's likely going to work again. Maybe the new staple gun is Cody Glass, Anthony Beauvillier in that case, if you're trying to work out what you're discussing here. Again, it's a bit of a harder scenario, a bit more juggling and shuffling that needs to happen for the lineup to really pull something like that off. But maybe that's the direction to go in, because I don't know full well if, first of all, if Puljujarvi is even going to be in the lineup whenever Malkin returns, considering what Anthony Beauvillier just did with Cody Glass. So where does that then shuffle everyone else out to? So maybe the third line turns into Kevin Hayes centering Beauvillier and Glass, and O'Connor gets that bump to the second line, like you said, to play with Bunting and Malkin. Or maybe finally Matt Nieto gets scratched and they go in that sort of direction. Again, one player of Malkin's caliber coming back should sort of put the lineup back to what everyone expected going into the Columbus game. However, because those three, naked two, played so well together, maybe you try and see if that can continue. This is why the coaches get paid the big bucks, especially Mike Sullivan, because this isn't an easy thing to sort of figure out. I mean, I could sit here and draw up forward cores all day, but at the end of the day, it's a matter of who's working well together. And I was going to, again, suggest the idea of Malkin playing with Crosby, but Raquel's just too much of a heater to lose that power. So there goes that option. But it's going to be fascinating. I would just expect, and because just knowing how Mike Sullivan works, maybe for Malkin's first game back, they just kind of swing Malkin back to second line center, Cody Glass back to the right wing, and just kind of filter out everything the way it was going to be at the previous morning skates, and then going from there. They are playing the Oilers, so don't expect too many good things, because the Penguins cannot play the Oilers at all.
Yeah, they might need Prime Mario Lemieux to be able to compete tonight. And I hope I'm wrong, but that's just been the case the last what, 10 times they've played Edmonton?
I think it was that Oilers game that was probably the worst game the Penguins had played at the Crosby era 2 seasons ago, the season Hextall got fired. That was when the fire Hextall chance started. I believe it was that game. So we'll see how things go from there. They're getting Alex Nedeljkovic tonight. I mean, maybe they just I don't want to say throw this game away. I'm not going to say throw this game away. Obviously, everyone's going to try, but maybe they just kind of give it here's the lineup we were supposed to put out against Columbus, see how it does. And then if it doesn't work, maybe then you do some of the shuffling like you've been mentioning here with Glass and Beauvillier playing together and then rolling forward from there on Saturday. That is, however, we're assuming Malkin's coming back. That's usually what game time decision means.
Yeah, but you never know. Yeah, so obviously tonight's going to be an interesting game. The one thing the Penguins really need to figure out tonight is the penalty kill. And that's mainly because the penalty kill over the last handful of games, I would say, has not been good, but I think that's sugarcoating it. I mean, you look at what they were on December 30th, which was what, 11 days ago, less than 2 weeks ago? They were the 7th ranked penalty kill in the National Hockey League, succeeding on 83% of the chances that they were put out there. Now, this has been something that even the last 2 seasons, whenever the Penguins were not great on the penalty kill or power play 2 years ago, they were great on the penalty kill. Last year, the Penguins had the worst power play that we have seen in the Crosby era. Their penalty kill was still floating around that top 10 mark. It's something that we kept saying, man, at least Mike Vellucci has his guys in order. And to start this season, they were doing that once again. But the problem is on this 4-game losing streak, and I get it, it's a small sample size, but on this 4-game losing streak, they've allowed 5 goals on 11 chances, which puts them at 27th in the NHL since December 31st, which is 54.6%, an ungodly low number. But it's not just that they're giving up a lot of goals, because the Penguins, as we know, have been in most of these games, actually been in all of these games. The problem is these goals are coming at awful times. When this has been your biggest strength for a large portion of this season and the previous 2, it's been the most consistent unit the Penguins have had. They've cost them games this past week. You look at the Columbus game on Tuesday. They give up the tying goal in the 3rd period. You look at Florida over the weekend. They give up the go-ahead goal against the Florida Panthers. You look at Detroit last week where they lost 4-2. They gave up the game-winning goal in the 3rd period. So all of these goals coming at crunch time where you're saying, all right, we took a penalty. That's not good. But you'd hope that at least in 2 of 3 scenarios, you'd be able to rely on your most consistent unit. Instead, they've gone out there, they've given up goals that have cost the Penguins. And honestly, you could say has cost them 3 points in the standings over this past week.
It's essentially the inverse of the power play discussion that we had all of last season. Hey, the Penguins are losing these games by a goal or 2 in games where the power play let them down. Well, now it's the Penguins are losing games by a goal or 2 in games where the penalty kill gave up too many. Like you mentioned, I mean, they've lost the last 3 in overtime. I mean, 3-game point streak rolling for you. That's not terrible, but they're all 3 overtime losses. It's, okay, fine. 2 shootout losses and an overtime loss, but still, you're not getting that extra point. And why are you even getting to overtime in the first place? Because your penalty kill isn't helping your team out, especially considering, like you said, how good it was doing earlier in the year. It does just feel like the inverse of what we had to discuss all of last year. Just they're losing by a single goal, and here's exactly why. Here's a place where 1 goal could have made a difference, and the special teams have always been an anomaly for the Penguins. Just the last couple seasons, it's not good anomalies.
And with that said, I mean, the big question that we have to ask now is, how concerned are you with this dip in performance from the Penguins penalty kill?
The concern level is going to grow pretty much as it doesn't pick itself back up. Like I said, we had all the discussions last season of the power play not performing up to its level. I think the concern level there picked up when it was going on a month of underperforming, 2 months of underperforming, weeks of underperforming. As long as the penalty kill continues to underperform, and as long as the 5-on-5 scoring isn't making up for it, for as long as the power play scoring isn't making up for it, then that's when the concern grows. Because, yeah, you can have pieces or areas of your game dipping as long as something is making up for it on the other end, much in the way of earlier this season that, well, the goaltending wasn't doing very well. Neither was the defense, and they weren't helping each other out. So far, nothing has really helped the penalty kill out for the most part. Again, they're collecting pity points, but it's just not enough. And the concern level is going to grow for about as long as that doesn't start to rehash itself.
Yeah, you can't make the playoffs by counting by one. You need to start counting by two, especially in these games against your Columbuses. You got a big one coming up against Ottawa. As far as the performance of the penalty kill, I have faith that that unit will bounce back. They've been too consistent over the last several years, and even earlier in this season, they've been too consistent for me to believe that they're going to continue to perform this poorly. I'm more concerned with what it's caused. And I understand that some people are going to say, listen, it's only 3 games. Like, it stinks. They should have won at least 1 or 2 of those games, but it's only 3 games. I'm going to kind of counter that argument with the Penguins have missed the playoffs the last 2 seasons by a combined 4 points. We led off this entire segment saying that PK has almost exclusively cost the Penguins 3 standings points this week alone. So that's what I'm more concerned with, is if we get to the end of the season and it's a repeat of last year or the year before, and all of a sudden we're looking back on this first week of January and saying, man, if the penalty kill could have gotten maybe 1 more stop in those late third periods against teams they should beat. They haven't lost to the Columbus Blue Jackets in Pittsburgh in so long. You should have won that game up 2 with 7 minutes left to go, even up 1 with 5 minutes left to go, going on the penalty kill, a unit that has been your bread and butter when you've been at your lowest the last 2 seasons, and they weren't able to get the job done. So that's what I'm more concerned about, and we're not going to find out the answer to that until April, but I don't want to have to look back on this week and say, man, even if the penalty kill turns it around, which I expect it to do, we have to kind of burn them at the stake because that 1 week they didn't perform, it cost them 3 points. Now, is there going to be other instances where you could go back to and say, oh, well, maybe if they would have gotten a point there? Yeah, you do that every year. But it is so glaringly obvious that in 1 week, there are 3 standings points left on the board in a conference that we talked about earlier is right now as close as I think we've ever seen an entire conference be at the midway point of a season.
Yeah, it's a tight race. You got to collect those points 2 at a time. And yeah, I like all the points are making there. It's just a matter of finding the game, finding the rhythm, and making up for those situations. Whenever you're going to be putting them, obviously the easiest solution is stop taking penalties, but that's not the way the game works. And whenever you are on the penalty kill, it's a matter of just finding what made you great in the first part of the season, getting back to that rhythm. And I mean, who knows what kind of trades that Kyle Dubas is trying to make this year, if they're buying or selling. I mean, they may look for the certain penalty kill face that can help boost up what has been lacking. It'll be interesting to see. It's just a matter of finding the rhythm, and there's plenty of confidence that they can do it again. But right now, the scary level is it's on the rise for the moment, though.
Yeah, and before we move on to our last point here, just a little tidbit, little final note, final nail in the coffin for the penalty kill of this week. It coincides with Marcus Pettersson's return as well. He's been on ice for 4 of those 5 shorthanded goals. Again, just going to plant that seed and just going to leave it where it lies. But Marcus Pettersson, as well as the rest of the penalty kill unit, they need to step it up because they continue to do this. It's going to get even more evident that their position in the standings is coinciding with the downfall of this unit. Let's close out this episode with a discussion on goaltenders because, Horwat, what is a Pittsburgh Penguins podcast without a weekly discussion on the goaltending situation? The Penguins, something needs to give because their current duo is, I think, inconsistent would be the nicest way of saying it. Since December 1st, Tristan Jarry is 5-3-3 and has an .891 save percentage. He has more games in which he finishes with a below 900 save percentage than he does finishing above 900 in the past month. Alex Nedeljkovic, meanwhile, is 2-2-1 with an 899 save percentage. So back in the day, 900 was NHL average. That has gone up as goaltenders have gotten better league-wide, yet the Penguins duo is inconsistent and struggling. And as we talked about off-air on Tuesday following our podcast recording, it's creating a logjam in the organization. Joel Blomqvist should be in the NHL right now. Sergei Murashov should be in the AHL right now. And Taylor Gauthier should be starting in the East Coast Hockey League. And yet, Blomqvist is in the A. Sergei is absolutely killing it in the ECHL. His 12-game win streak just came to an end last night with a 2-1 overtime loss. So, of course, it comes in a 2-1 overtime loss. And Taylor Gauthier was last year one of the best goaltenders the ECHL had to offer. And now he can't find any ice time. Now he probably has to pick up a part-time job at Giant Eagle just to make ends meet because he's not getting the performance bonuses this year because he doesn't get any time. Now, again, there's a word of caution because I understand everybody's excited about these young goaltenders. Not all great minor league goalies pan out, but these guys have been good enough to show that where they're at currently is not going to help them get better because they are too good for the level that they're currently playing at, especially Sergei Murashov.
Yeah, it's going to be... I mean, we saw Joel Blomqvist play at the NHL level. Maybe he's not totally ready for those reins quite yet. Maybe he should be a backup up at the NHL level. That's to be seen. And we all know probably next year he'll be at the NHL level full-time through hell or high water, depending on who goes where. Murashov obviously still needs a lot of seasoning and a lot of marinating in the professional system and in the North American system to really, boost up into the NHL conversation. But a ridiculous 14-2 run is enough to say, yeah, maybe he should be getting a couple of looks at the AHL level, should be getting more of a push in the higher league. And as for Taylor Gauthier, yeah, he's stuck behind Murashov right now, despite coming off of ECHL Goalie of the Year. I mean, maybe he should be up getting chances in the AHL level. It's a trio of young goalies that, the Penguins have to pick from and have a good future between the pipes. But, I mean, it doesn't help that those three are doing those great things at the minor league levels, and yet the two options at the NHL are Jarry and Nedeljkovic, who on paper should be perfectly okay, but are struggling in certain areas. I mean, we saw Jarry have to, pretty much recuperate himself at the AHL level for a couple of weeks. We've seen Nedeljkovic get hurt a couple of times since he joined Pittsburgh last year. It's a logjam that, maybe by next season, and hopefully, and should be by next season, pretty well organized and pretty well worked out. But for now, I mean, those three are just crushing it. And you're right, something does have to give for maybe Blomqvist to get the NHL bump and then everything else to sort of flow a bit more freely from there, because Gauthier deserves some more recognition than what he's gotten, at least an opportunity at the AHL level, a long-term one, to see if he has it. And then Murashov is still a couple years away, but man, he's already proving that he's got the base, he's got the skill level, and he's got the athleticism to cut it. It's just a matter of growing him into the system.
A lot of this sport, especially at an organization-wide level, is about answering questions. And the problem right now is you have all of the answers to these questions, and yet there's one big issue at the NHL level, right? The question, is Sergei Murashov ready to play on North American ice? Undoubtedly, unequivocally, yes. He's 14-2-1 in the East Coast League, .924 save percentage, 2.3 goals against average. He played 2 games at the American Hockey League, didn't lose either of those two, and had a .919 save percentage. Is he good in the North American game? Yes. Is he better than the East Coast League? Yes. So what's the next question? Well, can he do it over a consistent period of time at the AHL level? They need to find answers to that, and preferably find answers to that before this offseason begins so you can appropriately plan for next year. Because if you still have these questions going into next year, when you have the answer 4 months in advance, that is when you look at the organization as a whole and say, man, you're not doing your goaltenders justice. You're not doing your young prospects justice by keeping them at this level that you already know they're too good for. So that's Sergei Murashov at the ECHL level. Joel Blomqvist, he is a very good, one of the best goaltenders at the AHL level. He was an all-star last year. He's having another good season this year. Can he perform at the NHL level? You kind of had an answer to that, but that's the next question for him. I don't think that it's good if you have to wait until the end of 2025 to figure out if you have that. So what has to happen for the Penguins goaltending situation to kind of be unclogged and fixed per se? Best case scenario, and again, this is my personal opinion, best case scenario for everybody involved, maybe not this one player, but everybody else in the organization, is if they can find a dance partner for Tristan Jarry. Again, much easier said than done. You said earlier in this episode that Mike Sullivan gets paid the big bucks to make the lineup decisions. Well, Kyle Dubas gets paid even bigger bucks to make these types of decisions. But if you find a trade partner, a dance partner for Jarry, whatever that looks like, any way, shape, or form, he is off the roster, and you're not bringing another goaltender back. That gives Ned and Blomqvist the opportunity at the NHL to show whether or not they are a capable duo, and everybody else slots into their appropriate role. Whereas right now, none of them are. I mean, Tristan Jarry is a 1A on this team. Right now, he's playing more like a 1B to a backup. Alex Nedeljkovic is a 1B to a backup. Right now, he's stuck as a backup. And we already went through the minor league goaltenders and why they are right now kind of out of position if you had to look at an organizational depth chart. So I think that's the best case scenario. The most likely scenario, if they're going to get this fixed before this summer, is that unfortunately Alex Nedeljkovic ends up being the one that gets traded, and they still have to kind of figure out what the future looks like with Tristan Jarry, which is the biggest question, I think, one of the top 3 biggest questions facing the Penguins just overall this year.
It is. I mean, going into the year, we knew it was going to be. Going into last season, we knew it was going to be. It's not. You don't want to say Kyle Dubas didn't have a choice but to sign him to that extension, but it was damn near he didn't have much choice but to sign him to that extension. Since then, we thought maybe there's still something to be had there. I think pretty much everyone and their mother knows Kyle Dubas might be trying to move on from Jarry at some point, so maybe that would open the floodgates a bit. It's going to be hard to move the deal. But it's a matter of also, when are these young guys going to be completely NHL ready? And that goes for all 3 of them. If Taylor Gauthier ends up ever getting to the NHL ready position, at least. He's the oldest of the 3. And like I said, I believe deserves a shot at the A to see if he can take that step up. And then from there to see if he earns another step up. Because we see already that Murashev's earning his step up already pretty quickly, pretty rapidly is he earning that. And Blomqvist earned his stripes with, his stint in the NHL. Who knows when another one will come around for him. But he's like I said, he's gotten in some reps. He understands the system, understands the game, and is merging into that lane of ready for the NHL. As for what level, we'll see. But it's a logjam at the moment. And it's tough to say that the Penguins would be better off going with a Nedeljkovic-Blomqvist duo, just because it's 1B who's underperforming this year, but also maybe regressing to the mean. It's tough to say with Nedeljkovic, and still a very unproven talent in Blomqvist, but something's got to give for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it could. There is a world where it could, but I doubt it gets much worse than what you're getting out of goaltenders right now, especially, I mean, shout out to Brian Metzer of the Penguins Radio Network threw this gem out here with Tristan Jarry. Enough of this Rocky Balboa bullcrap that he's doing where he has to get punched in the face time and time again before he starts to even kind of enter the game. This is from Brian Metzer on Twitter. Says, over his 19 starts, Tristan Jarry has given up at least 1 goal within the first 4 shots he's faced 13 times. 13 of 19 games, he's given up a goal on one of the first 4 shots on goal. 6 times on the first shot he's faced, 3 times on the second shot he's faced, twice on the third, and 2 on the fourth. That is horrific. Like, you talk about the Pittsburgh Penguins and how they've been able to kind of reinvigorate their season here, that is in spite of Tristan Jarry putting them on their back foot time and time and time again. Imagine what would happen if, for maybe 2-week span, they score the first goal more times than they allow the first goal. Maybe they'd be winning more of these games. Maybe it wouldn't take a shootout loss where the Penguins are horrific in and it's not hockey anyway. But the fact that Jarry, 13 of his 19 games, he's given up a goal in his first 4 shots faced, that is, I mean, I'd say not good enough, but that is much further beyond not being good enough for a starting goaltender at this league.
That's nearly unplayable. Immediately giving everyone a head start within the first couple minutes of a game. It's almost unplayable because, like we mentioned with the penalty kill, it's starting to taper off a bit. It's starting to decline, and immediately playing from behind, if your penalty kill is also not helping you, well, then there's a second goal going in at some point. So no matter what you're doing offensively, you know you're giving up 2. You almost know that going in, that your offense is going to have to produce bare minimum 2 goals to force an overtime, produce a third to get a win, and that's the bare minimum. God only knows how Tristan Jarry would do throughout the rest of the game in other areas of, maybe there's multiple power play goals scored against. Maybe there's a couple of breakaways because Erik Karlsson had a weird pinch. All the scenarios get laid out in front of you, and you just realize you're playing from behind almost every game. And as we're having this discussion, there's a lot of discourse actively happening on Twitter about the Penguins goalie prospects. As we're having these talks, it's going to be talk of the town for a little while. Because again, I mean, Mershov's playing great. Blomqvist proved that he can cut NHL, at least in some way, shape, or form for now. They've got a lot of talent in the system. It's a matter of opening up those floodgates and getting that logjam situated.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk about opportunity right now for these young guys, and that's all we're asking for. We're asking for the appropriate opportunity to prove that they're at a higher level that they're at right now. So we'll have to wait and see, obviously, how this pans out. Right now, there's no chatter happening as far as, you know, the Elliot Friedmans, the Chris Johnstons, the Frank Saravallis of the world about anything considering the Penguins goaltenders. And what would you expect for 2 goalies that have been sub 900 for the past month and a half? But we'll have to wait and see how this all pans out, because we are just under 2 months until the trade deadline. And if it doesn't get answered by then, you got to wait to the summer. And then you have a lot of question marks going into next year, whereas you could get some of those answers before the summer and you'll be much better off as an organization. We'll have to wait and see. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Tip of the Ice-Burgh. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this one. Remember, you can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Ice-Burgh. Make sure you like, make sure you subscribe, tell all your friends, or you can check us out anywhere you get your podcast from. We'll see you guys next time.